EWC Cultural News Today, hosted by Amber Rodriguez.
Hello, I'm Amber Rodriguez. I'm here with Mr. Ernie Chambers. We have a few questions from some viewers that we'd like for you to address through our email EWC fax. So I would like to start out that our viewer said, I'd like to first start by saying that I love the Ernie Chambers show and am grateful to have discovered it. I don't really have any suggestions, but I do have a few questions. The first question is, if you had managed to win your bid for the United States Senate in 1988, what would have been your top legislative priority? What would be your priority if you were there now?
First of all, when I ran for the US Senate, it was as a representative of a political party called the National Alliance Party, and therefore I didn't have to register as a Democrat or a Republican. So had I won that race, I would have been unattached when I went in the Senate. You're either Republican or Democrat, some are independents and so forth, but I wouldn't have been subject to the Republican leadership or the Democrat leadership. And I would tell people when I first got there, I am here, and then give the circumstances. So I'm sent here to do the very best that I can. If the Republicans were doing something I agreed with, and they wanted me to caucus with them on that, and they could tolerate me, I'd work with them. I would work with the devil himself over here or the angels over there if they were going in the direction that I believed in. But being realistic, I knew that one man cannot get that much done in the Senate, even if he was a member of a particular party. So the first thing I would have done is to learn, like Kenny Rogers said, if you want to play the game, boy, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, and you got to learn the rules. So I would have read the rules that dealt with offering legislation to see what one individual could do unattached to either party, the rules governing the offering of amendments to bills that are being presented, and all of the things that would govern how the Senate operated. But everybody there would know that I'm my own person in terms of saying and doing what I believe. And I reckon success, not in terms of how many amendments I get adopted, how many bad amendments or bills I can defeat, but how close I come to doing what it is that I believe in the situation where I am and doing the best that I can.
Do you think you would have had the same impact in a bicameral like every other state in Congress as you have had in the Nebraska legislature?
It would be totally speculative, but I doubt that because people in Nebraska are so backward, but people are backward everywhere in some of these legislatures. But when you have two houses, one house can't do anything by itself. So let's say that I'm in the House of Representatives and I could tie them in knots. That wouldn't determine what was going to happen in the Senate. So if I was in the Senate, it would be the same thing. I would have to alter the tactics that I would use based on the rules governing that kind of organization. So I would spend time in the rule book, learn what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do, and I'd work within those rules. I would spend a lot of time discussing the issues that I believe in. I would find out how you are recognized in order to speak, how many times you can speak on a given issue, if you can offer amendments while the debate is going on, all of those things. Now I can summarize that by saying, I believe in finding out and learning the rules that govern the game that I'm going to get into. I don't write the rules, so my job, if they're my opponents, is to learn the rules so I can beat them at their own game, or at least slow them down and let them do as little harm to the public and ordinary people as possible. But as far as going in there with the grandiose notion that I can do in a two-house legislature, what I can do among bumbling stumblers in Nebraska would be preposterous. I would have to work within the confines of where I find myself.
So you mentioned your opposition in term limits in an interview with Fred Knapp. I've always thought term limits were a good thing until I listened to what you had to say about it. Could you go in more in depth about your position?
The public let me use the term voters. You have different districts, like legislative districts, districts for the city council, the county board, and so forth. But the ones in whatever district or entity it is who votes are called your constituents. There are people who believe that you will help them achieve through the political process what can be achieved to benefit them where they are. My primary responsibility would be to the people who sent me to the legislature. I would be their representative, but I always told people, I'm not an echo. I am here to study and master this process, and I will not go there to reflect or echo ignorance. My job is to understand what's going on, so I'm going to do it my way. That's the only way I can do it. And if you like it, you'll send me back. If you don't, you get somebody else. And because people are fickle, if I've done the very best that I can, but I've alienated enough people so somebody else would win the office, I'm not upset with the public who didn't vote for me. I'm not offended toward the one who won, because that's the nature of the political process. And if you let any of these things get inside of you and take you over, you'll be a nervous wreck. So now let me try to wrap it in a nice little bundle and tie it up. There were many people who couldn't stand the sight of me, couldn't stand the sound of my voice, but they wouldn't vote for anybody other than me, because whereas they may disagree with me on 9 issues, they say, but when it comes to my issue, nobody will handle it like Ernie. So there are different times on different issues that some people sound like they think I can walk on water. And then on other issues, they'll sound like they wish they could put me under that water and drown me. So I always made it clear, I'm going to do what I believe is right. You're going to agree sometimes, other times you won't. But I'm not going to go down there and echo and try to go along to get along. I'm going to do the very best I can with what I have to work with. And I try to give analogies so that if my explanation isn't clear, I will say, let's say that there are 10 issues and you agree with me on 9 of them, but that one you disagree with me on means so much to you that if I don't come down the line on that issue the way you want me to, you'll vote against me. That's what elections are about. And when I was on a program with Channel 22 where people could call in, I explained that I am not offended if people don't support me politically. I knew before I got in office how people are fickle. They'll say one thing to your face and do something behind your back. But I said, nobody will know how you vote in the voting booth. So don't feel like you have to come to me and lie and say you voted for me if you didn't, or say you voted and you didn't vote at all. You are entitled to secrecy and privacy. So I'm not going to ask you if you voted for me, or if you happen to tell me you didn't. I say, well, that's what this is all about. But if there are people out there who think they can do a better job and they don't know the process to go through to get on the ballot, I said, I will explain in detail, and you can let me know that you're doing it so you can run against me. Well, I ran against somebody and I won. So I'm probably what the people in Latin call a rara avis, a rare bird. I really am what I am, and that's all that I am. But when people find out what it is, well, at least for half a century, they liked what they saw enough to send me back again and again. And were it not for term limits, I would be in office right now. And I said that to come back to this question. The public or the voters should have the right to vote for whomever they please, as often as they want to vote for that person, or for as long as they want to vote for that person. In Nebraska, they made it clear they were voting for term limits to get rid of Ernie Chambers, and that was their watchword. There was even a national organization called Term Limits United or something like that. National, they even got involved in trying to get me out of the legislature. So when they succeeded in getting term limits, they ignored me when I said, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I cannot be in the legislature forever. The legislature is the only branch that represents the people directly. Now, you white people who hate me are not really putting me down. You're putting yourselves down because you're saying this man is so powerful in our organization under our rules that we can't control or corral him. So we're going to take the basic fundamental law of this state, which is the Constitution, and we will change that Constitution to get rid of him. All right, you change the Constitution, you get rid of me. Now what have you got? You've gotten rid of all of the others. The ones that you liked are going to be thrown out after they serve 2 terms. Then you begin to have regrets, but it's too late. I mentioned those kind of things at the time. And the reason I'm kind of elaborating on this, the US Supreme Court in some of its cases dealing with voting said that the right to vote is more than just marking a ballot or pulling a lever. It is a fundamental right that undergirds democracy. They even use the term human right, which means that by virtue of our being a human being, this right attaches to us and nobody should be able to take it away. So when you look at the value of the vote, you throw away your right to vote for whom you please and trying to get rid of one man. So this person, along with others who thought that term limits was a good thing, had not thought of it beyond it's going to kick Ernie out of office. I would even tell them on the floor of the legislature, and when I'd be invited to speak on campuses, they'd always ask me about term limits. I said, no man or woman should be elevated to such a point that the governmental structure is focused on that one person and trying to get rid of him or her. Once you do that, you've crippled the legislature, and that's what happened. It can never get the strength again unless they get rid of term limits, because nobody stays there long enough to be a factor like I was. I went there ready to run full speed ahead. Others, they began to catch on after 2 terms what the legislature is about. And then when they are about to be term limited, they'll all come to me. Now, when I say all, even the ones that oppose me, they say, Ernie, I think term limits is the worst thing in the world. And that's now because it's going to cut them out. So white people are so arrogant, they're so privileged, they're so spoiled, they don't have to consider consequences. They can look at what's in front of them right this minute, 3 inches in front of their nose, or close their eyes and see no further than the inside of their eyelids and live their life on the basis of that. And it makes no difference, because if they're fools and jackasses, white people's interests will parallel. If somebody over here is not taking care of what's needed, the white people over here will. They intersect, their rights and interests do. So if these are not doing it, there are others who do it. They overlap. So there never is a situation where white people have to rely on one person. But for us, as Black people, if you have that strong voice and that voice is silenced, nobody else is going to take it up and speak in the way that that person did. And when I've gone into that kind of detail, and I'm doing it now because I think it's such an important matter, people begin to think a little bit beyond their negative attitude toward me. But there were some people who were strongly in favor of me. They would almost break into tears when they began to talk. And it was because of the hard work that they thought I had done and what I'd achieved. And I said, well, look, you're the flip side of the coin from these people. You're putting too much faith in one man. Suppose term limits didn't get me, but I stepped off the curb and got run over by a car. If I am the be all and end all for you, when I cease to be, You cease to be. Let me be the horse that you can ride, but don't let me be the only mode of transportation you have. And that's why I would answer that question.
Do you think term limits will ever change?
I really don't know. If white people change, term limits will be done away with. But there are some states where they backtracked. I don't know all of them. But once I'm out of the picture for good, and they probably won't believe I'm out of the picture until I'm under the ground if I ever die. I don't know that I'm going to die. I should probably die because every human being, everything physical, everything that has life is going to come to an end. They might decide that the purpose that we had for term limits is now buried. Let's go back to sanity and undo term limits and let any person who can obtain the votes for the constituency that he or she represents go and serve as long as that constituency wants him or her to be there. After all, what business is it of me what goes on in your house and vice versa? So if the people in the 11th legislative district wanted to keep me there forever, what business is it of the white people in the other 47 districts, 48 districts? We comprise overall, at that time, we did less than 4% of the population. Less than 4%. And one man had such power, spread such fear, that the people in Nebraska told everybody who was watching that the only way we can deal with this man is to change our whole government. And if it means subverting the legislature, allowing the judiciary and the executive, meaning the governor and the courts, to run roughshod over the people, it's worth it because we got rid of him. That's sheer stupidity. In fact, it's madness.
So our next question is, what is your opinion on Bernie Sanders? Do you think if he were to run in 2024, he would win? And what do you think is keeping him from getting over the hump? Would you consider being his running mate?
I don't know much at all about Bernie Sanders. He was kind of a flash in the pan, and white people, and I keep mentioning white people because they dictate everything when it comes to politics because they have the numbers. They jump onto fads. Whatever the fad of the day is what they go after. That's what Bernie Sanders was. He was the oddball, and some people who were looking for something different supported him, but as you know, he didn't make it over the hump. I don't know enough about Bernie Sanders to give really an opinion about him one way or the other. And I won't adopt an opinion based on what other people tell me. I wouldn't be anybody's running mate. I'm not interested in being in any branch of the national government. When I ran for the Senate, I knew I could not win. There was no chance, but it upset the apple cart in Nebraska because people didn't know from where and from whom I would draw votes because I was not running as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, but as a member of the New Alliance or National Alliance Party. They didn't know where the votes would come from for me. But there is no large enough constituency of white people to put me in any office. There are some who strongly favor them. Sometimes a lot of them favor me, but not enough to put me in any office where the outcome is determined by the number of white people voting. I am realistic. I know how greatly disliked I am. And I don't see people's favor, their approval. I'll never be the most popular anything, unless we say the most popular one to be hated. I got that hands down. But some of those who hate me the most wind up coming to me for help, and they tell on themselves. They say, I voted for term limits and and give me every reason not to help them. So they say, why do you, I say, what do you come to me for then? That's your attitude toward me. They say, hey, well, now I know that that's not true. I know you'll help anybody. And if you decide to help them, you'll do more than anybody else. I've got letters to that effect. So everything I say, I can document. There have been articles where they would have people who would give that opinion. That they're so many and so many years old. They used to think this about Senator Chambers, and on that issue over there, I think he's nuts. But on this issue, he's my man. And that's the way people are. We have to realize if we're going to be dealing with the public, whether it's in a formal way, like politics, or if you're going to be an entertainer, a writer, or any field where you are concerned or interested in what the public has to say, be ready for them to, like with Jesus, one day say Hosanna and be putting down the palm leaves, and you come to town and they Hosanna and praise you. Then the following week, they crucify you. You cannot let what you are ultimately be determined by other people. If they have indigestion today, then they're going to behave like somebody with indigestion, and they might say things to you that you never thought you would hear from them. You've got to follow not the ABCs, but the CBA. You conceive it, you believe it, and you achieve it. You believe in yourself, you trust your judgment, you never give up, and you never quit. And as Whitney Houston sang, and unfortunately, not just for her, but people who loved her music like I did, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. And she did not love herself enough to get away from that fool who got her on drugs and ultimately helped cut her life short. But that didn't mean what she sang was untrue. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Believe in yourself and know yourself, and don't let anybody take that away from you. And people will value you as you value yourself.
Our next question is, how have you remained consistent over the years, especially when in a position of power? And by consistent, I mean the way you talk about race, as you always have. Why do you think this is not more common among Black leaders?
I can't speak for other people. I have my ideas. Some of them get bought out, some of them get scared out. But for me, I'm me. I'm just Ernie. So I'm going to say, as an older Ernie, what I said when I was a younger Ernie, because the circumstances haven't changed that much. If Pharaoh remains the same, Moses has to fight him the same. So as long as we confront the kind of issues that we do, I'm going to confront in my way, from my position, and the way that I do it. And I see no need to change. Now, I hope I get smarter. I hope I get cagier. But as far as my basic driving principle, that hasn't changed because the battle hasn't changed.
And our last question is, finally, what do you think the deal is with someone like Clarence Thomas? Or I guess, what conditions need to be met for someone like him to exist? Do you think it is interesting that he left out Loving v. Virginia in his list of cases that should be revisited?
Well, some people don't know what Loving versus Virginia was. This white man married a Black woman, and they lived in Virginia, and it was against the law there. So they had to go up north, and if they'd have come back to Virginia, they would have been prosecuted. So when the Supreme Court looked at it, they approved of interracial marriage. Well, Clarence Thomas married a white woman, and she was his mistress. And then in the sense, not that she was giving him illicit sex, but she owned him like a slave woman. I mean, a white woman owned slaves. She was a mistress in the same way that a white man was a master. This woman put a ring in Clarence Thomas's nose and dragged him around. Her family said it's all right for her to go with him because he's a clean colored man. They said demeaning, derogatory things about him, but he was so color struck that he went for this woman who was relatively empty-headed. And the only reason she has any status now is because she's married to that fool. I was opposed to Clarence Thomas when he was being considered for the Supreme Court. And Jim Exon was the senator from Nebraska. And I contacted him. Every state gets 2 senators, but he's the one I could talk to and explain why he should not vote for Clarence Thomas's confirmation. He voted for Clarence Thomas. And he came to me later and he said that's the worst vote he ever gave. And his wife had talked to him in the same way that I did and said, don't vote for him. So Clarence Thomas, because people saw him as supposedly a replacement for Thurgood Marshall, you could put a black person on the Supreme Court, but he wasn't what Thurgood Marshall was. So there were 8 justices on the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas was the 9th one, the 5th vote, if it was going to be broken down 5 against 4, whichever white group was the strongest one in moving him. We don't need a Clarence Thomas now. We didn't need him then. And the sooner he's off the scene by whatever means necessary, I'm in favor of that. His wife, Jenny, is one of those who says that the election was fraudulent, that Joe Biden is not really the president, that Trump still is, and that committee studying that attack on the Capitol on January 6th are going to ask her to testify. And they said if she doesn't do it voluntarily, they're thinking about subpoenaing her because she is the wife of this attorney, this Supreme Court justice. She has obviously influenced him. He has taken positions that are detrimental, and some of his decisions, as they're the kind, the only time he's allowed to write an opinion for the court is when he's going right down the line the way the white people want it, and it's not that important a decision, so it's not going to make any difference. But in this instance, where they wanted to overturn abortion and suggest other things that have become protected because the Supreme Court said that they should be, and you don't find mention of it by the founding fathers, as they say, or other legislation, those cases should be revisited to get rid of all of these so-called rights that were created by the Supreme Court. But as the questioner mentioned, Loving versus Virginia, it's had to do with whether or not interracial marriage is legal. Well, since he's married to a white woman, he certainly doesn't want them to go back and undo that. But here's the question that everybody ought to ask: if they're serious and if marriage means anything, stability of society means anything, for a relatively long period of time, same-sex marriages have been lawful. In some states, even before the U.S. Supreme Court said nationwide, they're lawful. What is to become of those people who've been married, same-sex marriages? They've adopted children. Are all of those marriages suddenly illegal? Those people now are in a relationship that has no legal standing. If they had made out wills or taken other legal steps, are all of those steps that require married people to take it suddenly rendered null and void? There is so much confusion that would result, but these white people are so hateful, they don't care about that. It's why somebody like me who studies their constitution and their laws will be able to run them in a corner, because I take seriously what those things say. Not seriously because I believe they're going to be extended to us when it comes to rights or privileges, but so I have a stick to beat them with that they put in my hand by writing their laws and constitution in the way that they did. We'll just have to wait and see how all of these things turn out. But what I hope is that young white people will see what their elders have done. There are a lot of younger white people who belong to the LGBTQ community, and they will not want to see this going back to where there is legally allowable discrimination, the taking away of rights that they enjoy now by virtue of statutes that say you cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation. If all of those laws are done away with, then all of the discriminations that were outlawed can now be imposed. There are companies that are run by religious people, families, and the US Supreme Court said that if they do not want to give rights to women, if they don't want to allow insurance to be provided for them as they do males, that's not unconstitutional because that's what they want to do. If they want to discriminate and not hire somebody because of sexual orientation, they can do that also. This is an insane Supreme Court. But since Americans don't read court decisions, they don't read newspapers, they don't read magazines that are critical when it comes to analyzing social events, they have no idea of the danger that this country is facing. And if it falls apart internally, there are others outside of this country. There's China, there's Russia, there's North Korea. Now, they call the Axis powers Mussolini and Hitler and any others that went along with what they were doing. Well, if you had North Korea, which has international ballistic missiles, nuclear that can reach the United States, China, a nuclear power, Russia, a nuclear power, and they see that America is the biggest hindrance to them doing what they want to do, they could wipe this country off the face of the map. And that's what these white Americans need to realize. What they do here is not done in a corner. There are strong forces around the world. And if Russia or North Korea decided they wanted to knock out the power grids in America, they could do that. You'd have no air conditioning. You'd have no internet, none of those things. If they wanted to knock out the finance centers around Wall Street with tentacles going all over the world, where would America be? Where would the people be who have money in banks? No records of it. They can't get it. And if they got it, it's not worth anything. Americans have no idea how perilous these times are. They're so interested in being against same-sex marriage, being against a woman choosing to have an abortion, Black people having freedom, that they are weakening this country. And there are predatory countries. They're viewed as predators by the Americans who are just crouched and waiting to spring. And I just mentioned China, Russia, and North Korea, but there are others in this hemisphere who don't like what America has done. And America cannot stand against all of them. There are winds that would blow through this country that nobody could withstand. You saw how much panic took this country when those planes on September 11th, 9/11, they call it, crashed into two buildings in New York City. Suppose they had been hit by ballistic missiles fired from across the ocean. Then what? But that's for white people to think about. And when it begins to happen, as the spiritual song says, they run to the rocks to hide their face. The rocks cry out, no hiding place down here. And this is how I'm going to wrap up my answer to that question. There's an old spiritual, and when I look at all these forest fires all over America where there are forests, these huge sequoia trees are in danger of being destroyed. All over Europe and other parts of the world, the forest fires are breaking out, burning millions overall of acres of trees. These trees take carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, and the impact is going to be felt around the world. There's an old spiritual that said, God gave Noah the rainbow sign. It won't be the water, but the fire next time. And the fire is burning all over this country and all over the world. And if it seems like I'm not concerned, my concern doesn't mean anything. But these white people who've been privileged, had everything their way. When their houses are destroyed, their buildings are destroyed, their money is gone, their computers don't work, the rogue cops are going to be able to do things that they couldn't do before. They're going to wonder why they're so interested in depriving other people of their rights that they ignored the fact that the lion and the wolf and the bear had formed an alliance and are going to end it altogether for all of them. And will I be pleased? I'm not pleased when any human being dies. I wouldn't even want to see Hitler burn somewhere forever. It's not in me to be that way. But there might be a corpuscle or two somewhere deep in my psyche that will say it's good enough for them. And they say, well, you're going to die too. Well, these white people are going to kill me anyway. They'll just go with me. And that's what they're confronting. Not because I say it, but I say it because that's the way it is.
Our viewer would also like to comment, thank you for taking the time to look over my questions and keep up the good fight. Now we're going to transition to talk of COVID. COVID is still here. COVID is still alive. And we have a few questions for you about that. So our first question is, from what you've seen in your local community, what is the best way to promote and increase vaccination rates?
If I knew that, then I could probably win the lottery. But all we can do is talk about it. I try to be an example by getting all my I got vaccinated. I've got all my booster shots. I talk about whenever I can. I wear a mask whenever I go to the store, even though there's no mandate. Everything I can do to call attention to it. If I had the answer, I would give it. I don't know what more can be done than is being done now. The hospitalizations are going up. Death rates are rising. But if people will not believe that it's there, despite all this, I have to quote what Jesus said. If they will not believe the law and the prophets and Moses, they will not believe the one come back from the dead and tell them. I don't have the answer. I wish I did.
Our next question is, if you could change anything about how the government initially handled COVID-19, what would it be?
More of what the intelligent people talked about, but they got caught up in this stuff that Trump was talking about, the crazy stuff. It's like a flu, and in a few months it'll go away just like the flu. Then he was talking about disinfectants that you can use on surfaces, and you were told that if you sanitize and so forth, then that will help keep COVID down. So he started talking seriously about the possibility of injecting disinfectants in human beings. And the scientists and the medical people, they cringed, but those who were in government were under such a tight rein and a short leash, they could not ridicule what Trump said based on how ridiculous it was. So he would have these large gatherings and boast about not wearing a mask. So those nuts who followed him wouldn't wear a mask. A lot of them would get COVID. A lot would go into the hospitals. They'd wind up on ventilators. They didn't have enough ventilators, and they would die. They were literally dying like flies. And there were others because they were what are called the anti-vax people. They don't believe in vaccinations of any kind. They don't believe that COVID is real. And I don't know what can be done to change their mind. If they know people, or they've even had family members who contracted COVID, and even if they didn't die, some of their limbs had to be amputated, and they won't believe. I don't know of anything that can be done. And COVID is a clever, clever foe. I use metaphors and analogies, and that just means I will attribute to what we consider to be a non-thinking critter like COVID virus. I will equate that virus with a person, one of these shape shifters. COVID, the head of the COVID family has been watching, and some of them who came down with COVID recovered and developed antibodies. But that didn't mean they wouldn't come down again, but they might not have it as severe in terms of the symptoms. There are antibodies that can be generated in your body through the vaccines. So head COVID is watching, And being a shapeshifter, he's going to learn how to dodge the antibodies and go between and around, and he'll teach that to the other little COVIDites. And they will be mutating, is what it's called, meaning they can adapt to what the antibodies do and be able to survive and render those antibodies ineffective. So what people ought to do is try to keep track of the variations. The one that the president got was called BA.5. It's a variant of COVID. And as variants take place, in other words, as the shape shifts, there becomes on the part of COVID an ability to dodge the impact of certain antibodies. Then there are scientists and medical people trying to keep track of what is going on and find a way to counteract it. All that the people who are concerned, as I am, can do is to follow the science and what the medical people say and take whatever precautions that they indicate are best. But that is not a guarantee that you will survive. But I have no guarantee that I'll survive until tomorrow. But when I get out of here and get in my car, I will stop when the light is red against me. If it looks like somebody's going to go through the red light, for them, I'm not going to say, well, I've got the green light, so I'm going to go. A slogan used to be, when it came to driving, it doesn't matter who's right, just make sure you'll be left. So although I'm taking every precaution that I can, there's no guarantee that I won't get COVID and come down with a version of it that will take me out of here. But I would have done everything I could against it. I've indicated when I've talked at forums where people were present, if they have any respect for me and what I say, the thing that I recommend is not going to harm them. So do as I have done and give yourself every chance to survive. If you will buy a lottery ticket with one out of several million chances of winning, you've got a more likelihood of being struck by an asteroid on this earth than you have winning that lottery. But now, since the grand jackpot is over $1 billion, people are running out by, I guess, millions, hoping that I'll be that one out of these hundreds of millions who will win. Well, if you do that with the lottery where you know in the beginning it's not likely that you're going to win, why, when it comes to your health, the welfare of your family, your friends, little children, you will not take the precautions which give you a better chance of not coming down with it, not infecting those who mean something to you. I don't have the answer. I will readily acknowledge it. But if people would just read, recover some degree of mental balance, stop rejecting science and the medical professionals because they are against vaccinations, they're against women having rights, they're against the LGBTQ community, they're against Black people in general. They've got to also be against what medicine and science will tell them, and they'll die. But there's nothing anybody can do when somebody refuses to be saved.
Our next question is, since monkeypox is on red alert in the US, what do you think of COVID and monkeypox possibly mutating?
I thought you were going to say marrying each other. I say, if they thought intelligently or could intellectualize, that's what they might do. All of these viruses, look, all of these are living entities. Even though they're microscopic and we can't see them, some of them are stronger and have a greater capacity to survive in hostile environments than human beings. Well, viruses mutate. When the body is attacked, then the immune system, to the extent it can, will send their troops and corral that invader and kill it if they can. But if the invader is too strong, then your forces, your immune system won't do it, and it needs help. If you don't get the vaccine and boost your immune system, then the invader kills you. Monkeypox, and they said they'd like to change the name of it because that makes some people reluctant to deal with it because it's degrading, so forth. It will behave, in my opinion, like any other virus. It will mutate, and if there is a vaccine for it, it will find a way, some variant of it, to maybe, and people who've gotten that vaccine, if they're not boosters, whatever, to go ahead and do its damage. Now, HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, was killing people, and at one time was a death sentence. So then they found medications that could give a person with HIV a chance to survive. So it was not necessarily a death sentence, but you should take a test and find out if you might have it. And if so, then what can be done? In those early days, I took the test. What they do is take blood and then go analyze it. I notified the media that I was going to take that test and that they could cover it. And I was hoping by me taking the test, it would be an example for others. All of that I'm saying to indicate that nature loves all of her children, the viruses, the bacteria, and they are given tools by which they can survive. So it's going to be a constant struggle and a constant battle. Animals, which are not rational in the sense of being able to think and figure things out like human beings, are subject to dying out from epidemics among them until some antibody is built up, and they, as a species, can survive, even though maybe thousands of individual members will die. Human beings can think, and they can try to study and understand the capabilities of these viruses and bacteria and how they function, how they cause diseases, how they attack the body, which parts of it they attack, and try to build defenses. But the scientists cannot make people take advantage of these discoveries. So the people who don't believe in taking precautions will get infected, and they can be infected without showing symptoms. If they have little children, the children get infected, the spouse gets infected, the co-workers get infected, and by the time they become aware of it, for some people, it's too late. So if people could visualize in their mind the way I do, that these viruses are like the shape shifters, they're more elusive than Johnny Rodgers and Gale Sayers were on the football field, but even they would get tackled. Then they can give themselves a chance. But if they're not going to take the vaccinations, they won't make use of the medications. The only thing that's available for them is death. Sometimes it's lingering, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's torturous, such as suffocating because you can't breathe, drowning in your own body fluids. The terrible things that scientists and medical experts have made clear that these viruses will do are not enough to convince people, and no government is going to require that people be shackled and compelled to be vaccinated. I don't have an answer. I just hope that the people, even my enemies, will think about the concept of self-preservation and not let it apply just to one's individual self, but all human beings, friends, enemies, and as I say, neutrals, because whichever category we fall into, we really do have more things in common than divide us. But because people, for example, dislike me so intensely, I can present the most logical argument for something and it'll be rejected because I'm the one who offered it. if they could be intelligent enough to separate the wheat from the chaff, and if I say something that makes sense, accept it even from me. But if they hate me so much that anything that pertains to me will be rejected, then that's how I defeat my enemy. I say yes, they say no. And if they followed my yes, they would survive. If they don't, they die. But I don't take pleasure in the death of anybody. Even that young guy who killed all those people in the schools. They have a channel on television called Court TV where the testimony is going forth, and they have the medical examiner describing autopsy results, the wounds where the muzzle of the weapon was against the flesh. They have some where there are defensive injuries, which means the people have put their arms up, their hands up to try to shield themselves. And the family members, you can see them in the courtroom wiping their eyes because I guess they visualize this small child seeing what happened to others and trying to protect himself or herself. And the guy comes over and puts the gun against them and will blow them away. It's a terrible thing when a species will kill members of its own kind, and human beings are the ones who will do that.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the monkeypox name. Is it fact or fiction that it will change the name for it?
I don't know, they're discussing it because they said the name itself is such that can make it difficult to have people acknowledge that they got it. So give it a different name. I don't know what they can call it, but they say that it's spreading most rapidly among homosexual men, and it's spread primarily by contact and sexual contact. So they said they don't want people to look at this the way they did HIV and brand an entire group as being like lepers and so forth. But as racist as people are in America, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to conclude that and rationalizing to protect themselves, that's a disease for these queers and these gays. I'm not gay, so I don't have to worry about it. And the monkeypox will say, that's a tree that I'm going to swing in.
Our last question is, what are the best practices for parents and children entering school this upcoming August?
Listen to what the experts say and follow that advice. And I don't mean by that these nuts who say you're against vaccinations and so forth, but there will be a lot of information presented by television and even through these websites, I guess you call them. I don't use the computer. And you will be able to get information that will equip you to the extent that the knowledge at that time will equip you to survive. Follow it. It's not going to hurt you to wear a mask. And as one of the comedians said, when Halloween comes, grown people will say, I don't want my child to have a mask. Even little babies wear a mask for Halloween, but they don't want them to wear a mask to save their own life. So I would say that I hope people will pay attention. And if there are people who decide that so many in the schools will not follow good practices because everybody's against mandates, and they decide to keep their children home and homeschool them, even though they're going to suffer intellectually, that's the price that has to pay in order for them to live. Because Satan said to God, and God didn't disagree with it, skin for skin, all that a man hath will he give for his life. So a parent will readily change or exchange or trade the child's knowledge of math and science for the child living. They can at a later time learn what they didn't learn this year. But if they come down with the disease and they die, that's curtains. It's over. The chips have been cashed in. I don't have answers for these things. If I had the answer to something like racism, which is the bedrock of this country, everybody would be free now? I don't have the answer to that. I don't really have the ultimate answer to anything for anybody else. And even what I take as an answer for me, there's no guarantee that it's going to keep me here. But so far, at 85 years old, and I can drop down and do 30 push-ups whenever I want to, and younger, stronger people can't do it. I use that to show them not that I'm better than you, but if you take care of yourself, when you're my age, you'll do even more than I am because you have an example that I didn't have. There were not 85-year-old people. There were not even too many of them around, but they'd be on crutches or canes or wheelchairs or sitting in the chair. And in the morning, they rock front to back. In the afternoon, they rock from side to side. And if you ask them what their name is, they'd be as likely to say George Washington as what their name is. And I'm not saying it to ridicule people, but anything in nature that's not used will become unuseful. If you sit down and don't walk at all, even if you're young, your muscles will shrivel and you won't be able to walk. But if you make use of what nature gave you, it will strengthen. That doesn't mean you'll stay here forever. It doesn't mean your mind will always be clear. But as long as there are things I can do to keep my mind clear, I'm going to do it. I don't care what anybody else does. If exercising will keep my body strong, my immune system operating, that's what I'm going to do. People can mock, they can laugh. But as the expression goes, he who laughs last, laughs best. But I won't be laughing because I feel like that poem said, any person's death diminishes me because I'm a part of humankind. Therefore, seek not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I'm among that thee. The bell is going to toll for me at some point, and I'm going to cease to be. But as long as I can be here, I'm going to be here. And in wrapping this up, Methuselah lived longer than any other man, 969 years, 969. And when time come for him to die, he was world famous because everybody knew how old he was. And so he got ill and he was going to croak. And they asked Methuselah, was there something he could tell people to sum up everything in his life? He said, I can sum it up in one word. And they said, Methuselah, what do you mean? You lived 969 years, and now the time has come for you to go, and you can sum it all up in one word. What is that one word? Methuselah said, already? In other words, that 969th year means as much to you as that 20th year. When you were 20, you would have said, I've got to go already. I haven't lived. Methuselah said, after 969, I've lived this long. I shouldn't have to go now. Life is precious and it ought to be respected. And not everybody respects it in themselves or others. Some people do. And some respect it so much that they want to do everything they can to preserve it in everybody, even their worst enemy, to make life not just an existence, but something that you live and enjoy. And I hope that, well, my hope doesn't mean anything, but we have had this interview. I probably talked longer than most people would, but I'm like, I always say, if the opportunity presents itself, take it and run with it. And that's what I've tried to do.
Thank you for this interview, Mr. Chambers, and your insight. If viewers have further questions they would like Mr. Chambers to address, you can email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com.
You've been listening to EWC Cultural News Today, hosted by Amber Rodriguez. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.